Hey guys, it's Casey, and today we're going to try and identify the UA traitor. Spoilers up to chapter 176 of the manga. So, the idea of a traitor was first introduced in chapter 83 because of two main incidents. First, the League of Villains attacked USJ, implying knowledge of UA's schedule. Second, the League of Villains attacked UA's training camp with the Wild Wild Pussycats, also implying inside knowledge about the inner workings of UA. It's stated that only the teachers, students from Class 1A and 1B, and the Pussycats themselves knew the geographic location of the training camp. Immediately, we rule out Midoriya and Bakugo, since Midoriya is the narrator and Bakugo behaved uncooperatively when captured against his will by the League of Villains. So we can assume neither of them is passing information to the League of Villains. We can also rule out the Pussycats because they wouldn't logically have known such a specific detail about UA's schedule to be able to help plan the USJ attack. I also ruled out most of Class B because, from a writing standpoint, it just doesn't make much sense to have any of them as a traitor, with the exception of perhaps Monoma, Kendo, or Tetsutetsu because the others aren't memorable or important. Now, if I was a character in World, obviously I couldn't rule Class B kids out because of that, but because I'm a reader outside who would be disappointed if the writer decided one of those very minor characters was the traitor, I can rule them out that way. Basically, if it would be a major letdown if that character ended up being the traitor, I ruled them out immediately. Obviously, this is a matter of opinion to some degree, as is everything in this video, but that method left me with only Blood King and Monoma from Class B. So what I have on screen here is a compilation of all the suspects for the UA traitor. Logically, it would make more sense for one of the staff members to be the traitor, just because they're more likely to be out on the streets running into and making deals with the League of Villains without worrying as much about their personal safety. Plus, the students didn't even know they were going to USJ before they got there. So let's go through the UA staff first. We can eliminate a few people right off the bat, like All Might and Principal Nezu. I think it's fairly obvious why All Might isn't the traitor, or at least isn't intentionally the traitor, more on that later, and we saw Nezu contemplating the identity of the traitor while alone in his office. If he was the traitor, he wouldn't be wondering who it was. I also didn't even consider some of the other teachers, such as Snipe, Cementos, Ectoplasm, and Lunch Rush, because I felt, similarly to most of the Class B kids, that it would be disappointing to readers if any of them ended up being the traitor. Next, we can eliminate 13. We know he wasn't the traitor because the League of Villains showed up at USJ expecting All Might to be there when 13 knew beforehand that All Might wouldn't be there. Shortly before the attack, All Might has to sit out from the class due to straining himself with hero work. It is an unplanned absence, so it isn't recorded on paper anywhere, showing when Aizawa shows up at USJ and asks 13 where All Might is. Unlike Aizawa, 13 knew that All Might wasn't going to be in class that day. If 13 was the traitor, he would have contacted the League of Villains before they or Class A arrived and told them not to show up to kill a guy who wasn't there. So we know it's not 13. After eliminating All Might, Nezu, and 13, however, we can't rule anyone out for sure. So let's talk about Aizawa first. There's no hard evidence that Aizawa couldn't possibly be the UA spy, and it'd be convenient for the League of Villains if they managed to get him on their side, since he avoids the public eye, he's up close and personal with students and All Might, and he's made privy to a lot of secret info about Class A fairly quickly as their homeroom teacher. However, it seems unlikely to me that Aizawa would be the traitor for several reasons. Firstly, he cares way too much about his students to be able to harm them. Even in the USJ attack itself, he nearly dies in order to protect his students and puts on a brave face in order to comfort them. We see in the final exam arc how much he cares about Yaoyorozu's self-confidence. In the manga, Aizawa defends Bakugo from reporters and sacrifices his own safety for Midoriya's. None of these are things he necessarily has to do, but he does them anyway. Aizawa is a character who does everything based on logic, but his brand of logic puts his students very high on his list of priorities. While it's possible that his attitude towards his students is another one of his logical ruses, he has no reason to put on such a convincing facade. No one would call him out if he didn't. That's why I don't think Aizawa is the traitor. Next, we'll chat briefly about Recovery Girl, Midnight, and Blood King. All three are fairly minor characters without any motives we know about for betraying UA. Additionally, Recovery Girl isn't a teacher, so it doesn't seem like she's very involved whenever they're planning Hero Course activities. I don't believe she's ever seen at that table where all the teachers sit around to plan things. At this time, we have no reason to believe Recovery Girl, Midnight, or Blood King are traitors, so I ruled them all out. Now, Present Mike. So we don't know much about a possible motive for Present Mike either, but out of the teachers, he'd be my number one suspect for the traitor. The reason is that he's the one who originally introduced the idea that there might be a traitor, but that's quite a logical leap considering the world they're living in. All kinds of quirks exist, and they also noted after the USJ attack, there were individuals with unregistered quirks, such as Kurogiri and Shigaraki. There are many different quirks that could have accounted for the League of Villains' knowledge. For example, clairvoyance or telepathy. The League of Villains' source of information could even be a simple bug planted in Nezu's office, or hacking the UA system, or wiretapping Nezu's phone. Espionage like that could be facilitated with any number of quirks. A quirk like Shinso's could turn someone into the traitor against their will. But Present Mike is so sure there's possibly a traitor among them, even though there are a lot of other possibilities to explore before going there. While it is good to explore the possibility as soon as possible, by not suggesting anything else, he's pretty much jumping the gun. Perhaps the reason he suggested it so readily and so unhesitatingly is because he knows there's a traitor. But we still didn't talk about the students yet. So even though the students didn't know they were going to USJ until they got there, that doesn't put them in the clear. Because of the aforementioned possibility of hackers and other unaccounted for quirks, it's possible that the League of Villains didn't even need a traitor's help to plan the USJ attack. So as I mentioned before, I already ruled out most of Class B because they haven't had any spotlight moments, and therefore, unless they're given a spotlight moment or two between now and the reveal of the traitor's identity, it would be sloppy writing for any of them to be the traitor. An interesting traitor character is usually written so that he or she is right under the reader's nose the whole time, but has a reasonable amount of attention so that we start to become invested in them. Using that logic, I also eliminated any Class A students who haven't really had a character moment that connected them with the audience. Again, matter of opinion to a degree, but I ruled out Ojiro, Koda, Shoji, Sato, Sero, Jiro, and Hagakure for this reason. We know Yaoyorozu isn't the traitor because she made a tracking device to locate the enemy when Bakugo was captured. No one would have faulted her for not doing it, it was completely her own suggestion that she do it. If she was the traitor, she wouldn't have bothered helping the heroes. We can also assume that Todoroki and Kirishima aren't the traitors because they're the ones who initiated the Bakugo rescue operation. While it's possible that it was either Todoroki or Kirishima's idea and the other followed along, since most of the class was against it, there would be a perfectly valid reason not to want to go through with the operation. If either was the traitor, they could have dropped the idea or shot it down when the other brought it up on the pretense that they agreed with the rest of the class. Todoroki has the added actions in his favor that he was super helpful to the heroes during the USJ attack, even saving All Might at one point. Actions he could have avoided without arousing suspicion, but which he chose to do anyway. We can also assume that Tokoyami is not the traitor, since the League of Villains expressed interest in capturing him during the training camp. It's possible that they wanted to, quote, capture him in order to exchange information with him, but there's no reason they couldn't contact him later when it's tactically easier and doesn't require dangerous interaction with out-of-control Dark Shadow. Plus, since they already knew the location of the camp, that implies that they had contact with their spy before the attack anyway. We can also assume that Ida isn't the traitor because he went to get help during the USJ attack. We see him run for help even after he leaves the building and no one is watching. If he wasn't genuinely looking for help, he could have slowed down after leaving USJ, but he didn't. He also doesn't go straight to get All Might. If he was with the League of Villains, he would want to fetch All Might instead of the other teachers so that they could carry out their plan, and he'd have a perfectly good excuse for doing so. Overconfidence in All Might that most of the characters still carried at that point in the story. Additionally, Ida is so earnest about his love and admiration for his brother, shown when he acts rashly during the Stain arc, that it's unlikely he'd do something as dishonest and slimy as spying on Yue when he considers his idol so noble and heroic. The only other two students who are absolutely not traitors are Midoriya and Bakugo, so after eliminating less prominent characters, we'll have to speculate the rest of the students' loyalties based on their personalities. So let's start ruling out some more students. Mineta is mostly intended for comic relief, so I think it would be pretty boring if he ended up being the traitor, but the main reason he is probably not the traitor is that he's generally a coward. Considering how easily frightened he is, he's not the type to do anything that'll put him in harm's way. Plus, he was present during the USJ attack and was terrified. If he knew about the attack and was going to be that scared anyway, he could have just stayed home sick or went to Recovery Girl's office before the attack. His behavior implies that he didn't know the attack was coming. While that could be an act, we're shown his thought process during the attack as Asui jumps away, taking him and Midoriya to safety. He's inspired by Midoriya's heroism and pushes himself to throw more sticky balls as a result. If he was actually a villain, he wouldn't have behaved that way and no one would have questioned it, chalking it up to his cowardliness. Ashiro is probably not the traitor because she's shown to have a heroic nature, even when no one is watching. We see Kirishima's flashbacks about her that she jumped in to help some of her classmates who were being questioned by a villain when she didn't have to. Because she seems so earnest about heroism before even getting into UA, it doesn't seem like she'd be the traitor, and we don't know anything about her backstory that might imply she could be blackmailed or bribed. Plus, she's not the most intelligent character either, and while it's possible she's only pretending not to be too smart, it's not as likely as someone else being the traitor. I believe there's a fairly popular theory that Kaminari is the traitor, but I personally would be pretty surprised if that ended up being true for the simple reason that Kaminari has barely done anything so far. While he does have one or two interesting spotlight moments, mainly in the provisional license exam, he's often used for comic relief, similar to Mineta, and if we do look at Kaminari's one moment in the provisional hero license exam, what's he doing? Talking about how his friends deserve respect and how Shishikura shouldn't diss them, as it says in this particular translation, which would be an unnecessary display of loyalty if he were the traitor. Once again, it's not something that he would be faulted for if he didn't do it. Like Ashiro, we don't know much about his backstory that might show he could possibly be blackmailed or bribed. There's also a prominent theory that Uraraka could be the traitor, but I would also be surprised if that ended up being true. Because she's so bubbly and earnest in personality, it's difficult to see her as the traitor. While that would be the perfect cover-up, she's also somewhat oblivious and straightforward in conversation, shown when she asked Ida straight out if he was a rich boy, and Midoriya thinks she's too direct about it. It's generally pretty rude to ask someone if they're rich so directly, but the possibility that this might offend anyone doesn't even occur to her, and she continues the conversation with earnesty. She also has trouble hiding her crush on Midoriya. It's so obvious even all the other characters can tell. If she can't even hide a crush, it doesn't seem likely that she would be able to hide the fact that she's a traitor from everyone. It's possible it's an act, but it seems even more unlikely than the other possible acts because she's so embarrassed every time someone points it out, and she also runs through a mall alone thinking about how she wishes she didn't have an embarrassing crush. If it was an act, she wouldn't have to run away when she and Midoriya were alone, since he doesn't get it anyway. And that moment in the mall when Shigaraki has Midoriya in his grasp, she doesn't recognize Shigaraki. She seems genuinely frightened by the situation. The only thing I can see that might make Uraraka the traitor is that she's motivated by money because of a love for her family and a desire to take care of them. If the League of Villains bribed her with a comfortable life for her family, perhaps she'd take it, or if they blackmailed her and threatened to harm her parents, she might do what they want her to do. However, again, she's not great at hiding her feelings, so I don't think she's the traitor even though she might go to shady lengths to provide for her family. Okay, now we're getting into characters I think could actually be the traitors. Monoma, Aoyama, and Asui. Now, Monoma is also more of a comic relief character than anything else, without an obvious motive, and it wouldn't make for as shocking a reveal if he were the traitor instead of a more major character. However, he was far away from the USJ attack, so his physical safety would be guaranteed during the attack. He was also the only Class B student who failed his final exam, and therefore was the only student who needed supplementary lessons and was safe with Blood King away from most of the action during League of Villains' attack on the training camp. Considering that everyone else in his class passed, it's weird that Monoma would be the only one to fail, considering he seems decently intelligent based on his strategy during the sports festival, and fairly capable based on his final placement. Not the strongest, but probably not the weakest in his class either. It's possible that he failed on purpose in order to avoid the danger of going to the training camp where the villains would attack, since the original plan was that anyone who failed the final exam wouldn't be able to go at all. However, again, the reveal if he is the traitor might seem kind of silly if he's not given a serious cool moment. Next up, Aoyama. He's also a very minor character without an obvious motive and has an awkward personality that could account for any of the odd behavior he's been exhibiting lately in his increased panel time, like spelling things with cheese and stuff. It might also be a silly reveal if he ends up being the traitor. However, he's one of my prime suspects for the traitor because he's gradually getting closer to his classmates. Unlike the other characters, it takes Aoyama some time to make any friends among his classmates, behavior that could simply be due to social awkwardness, but could also be because he was purposely distancing himself from them because it's easier to betray strangers than your friends. In fact, we learned in a recent chapter that Aoyama has eaten alone in the classroom all year. During the USJ attack, Aoyama is nowhere to be seen. Though he is the one who draws attention to this fact after the attack, his hilarious answer is bound to be ignored and brushed away. He also hides during most of the training camp attack. When he does jump in to help at the last moment with his naval laser, it could be because he's feeling more and more close to his classmates and is finding himself genuinely caring about them. The look on his face suggests internal conflict about getting involved, which could very well just be him fearing for his safety, but it could also be him having a deeper internal monologue about his loyalties. As the arcs go on, such as in the provisional license exam and now the school festival arc, Aoyama is gradually making more friends and becoming closer with his classmates. We also learned a little of his backstory, that his quirk doesn't suit his body. We don't know what kind of consequences this has had in his life, but we do know that it's caused him to feel insecure and inferior, easy prey for the League of Villains promising him things. We know he's drawn to people who understand him since he's drawn to Midoriya due to their similarities, so why not a villain claiming that they get him? Because he was so conceited in the beginning as a defense mechanism, why wouldn't he prioritize himself and whatever reward the League could give him over the safety of strangers? Next, we have Asui. So far, she's the one with the most suspicious disposition in my opinion. She's always very calm and doesn't express herself much. Her face is fairly blank most of the time. She claims that she says whatever she's thinking, but she's talking about being blunt, not impulsive. She doesn't seem like the type who would have trouble keeping a secret. She's also stated to be a well-rounded student and would be an asset to the League of Villains if they could get her to join them. We know she has a family, so blackmail is a viable option. She hasn't done anything suspicious so far, but her actions could be interpreted as possibly helping the League. She's the first one to point out that Midoriya's quirk is similar to All Might's, which is an interesting comparison to make, especially considering no one else had thought of it because of how it damages Midoriya. She watches him carefully as he reacts, but doesn't give any of her own feelings away. During the Bakugo rescue arc, she is against rescuing Bakugo and is very harsh about it. While it's possible she really does agree with the rest of the class that it makes them no better than the villains and it's in line with her usual bluntness, it's a lot harsher than what the other students said. She apologizes later and claims that it's because she's so sorry about it and thinks she was wrong, but her absence from the Room King game could have actually been her questioning her decision to betray her friends in the first place. While Asui did help Midoriya and Mineta escape during the USJ attack, the goal of the villains was to kill All Might, not the students, so it wouldn't have been strange to do so. During the training camp and the overhaul arc, Asui didn't do much. While it could just be because she's a side character, it may also be because she wasn't trying that hard to stop the evil plans being carried out. While Asui doesn't do anything that proves she's a spy, she also doesn't do anything that proves she's not, and doesn't have a personality that seems to suggest otherwise either. So I know I've depended a lot in this video on the idea of characters performing unnecessary actions that imply loyalty to UA as support that they aren't the traitor, but considering their age and that most of the characters don't seem sociopathic, I assume that they wouldn't be conniving and unempathetic enough to create such a convincing facade that they would do things that are unnecessary or contrary to the goals of the League of Villains when no one would suspect them for not doing them. It takes an extra measure of manipulativeness to actively do things to prove it's not them before they've even been accused, rather than simply avoiding doing anything suspicious. While it's possible that any of them might have that quality in them, it doesn't seem as likely as a character without unnecessary acts of helpfulness being the traitor. I've also seen a theory floating around the internet that Toga could potentially be the spy if the League of Villains captured someone and is able to supply her with a steady supply of the captive's blood. While it's a really interesting idea, I don't think Toga could pull it off for a few reasons. Firstly, she'd have to replace a character who's really easy to impersonate and be able to do it well enough to trick their loved ones. It's not very realistic that she could impersonate someone well enough that no one would suspect something's off, unless that person has a similar personality to her or was very mysterious to people in the first place. While it's possible she's just really good at acting since she was able to replace Cammy for a day or two and no one thought anything was amiss, generally Toga has a very loud, hyper, impulsive personality that would be difficult to hide for a long period of time. Secondly, she'd have to replicate their quirk for class activities or hero work, which as far as we know she can't do. So in conclusion, the traitor, if there is one, is most likely President Mike or Asui, or perhaps Aoyama or Monoma. As I said earlier, I think it's pretty careless of them to assume there's a traitor without exploring other possibilities, considering the world they're living in, but considering that characters who are stated to be really smart, like Nezu, also conclude that there is a traitor, I'll chalk that up to oversight on the author's part and assume there's a traitor. Plus, to hype it like this and then not follow through on it would be disappointing to readers, and I assume the author is going to include a traitor because of that. Let me know what you think in the comments, though. I'm curious what you all think. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. If you liked the video, don't forget to like it, and subscribe if you want to see more similar content. Bye!